how do we quiet that anxiety? Because we all have it, especially, in being in a pandemic or getting out of a pandemic or half and half. People are having a hard time with all of that right now.
Yep.
And including you, me, everybody. What do you tell people, or and this is what I was going to say also, what you give people is actionable. It's not just here, la-di-da. There's things that, I'm sure you're going to say right now, what people can actually do to implement to help with their anxiety, suppress it a little bit, or just deal with it better.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because when I look at all the amazing people that are out there putting content out, writing books, doing shows, I tend to think about the fact that there are people that talk about why, there are people that talk about what, and then there are people that talk about how, and I'm a how. And when it comes to anxiety, which is a really big topic, it's really important before you get to the how to actually understand what anxiety is and what anxiety isn't. And so if we can go down this road, I would be happy to unpack this topic because it's super, super important. So first thing is, anxiety is nothing more than your body and your mind anticipating that something bad is about to happen. So there is a bracing in your body and there is a racing in your mind associated with what might happen, okay? I'm going to give you an example that explains an anxiety response and that's normal, that everybody can relate to. And then we're going to talk about what has become, in my opinion, an epidemic of generalized anxiety, which is the experience of going through your day-to-day life, feeling on edge, like something's about to happen, so your nervous system is dysregulated, and your thoughts are always spinning several steps ahead of you. What if this? What if that? What if the other thing? So just normal anxiety. I'll give you an example of an anxiety response to something. So let's say you and I hop in your car and we drive to the grocery store. And as we are chatting away and talking, all of a sudden somebody swerves into our lane. What do?
I panic and I get anxiety, but I freak out or I try to move.
Correct.
Car.
Exactly. Yeah. That is a normal anxiety response to a very stressful thing.
Right.
Okay. The car's about to hit us. It hasn't hit us yet. So something bad's about to happen. And immediately your nervous system has a big wave of, oh my gosh, go through it. Anxiety response. Okay. The anxiety response, it has a purpose. It is trying to wake you up to pay attention because something's about to happen. So that wave you feel of, oh my gosh, the car, that is got a purpose to protect you, okay? Your thoughts then start scrambling to try to protect you. It's going that way. I got to pull this way. So you start thinking about the what if that, what if, and you respond, right? Now, here's an interesting thing. When the car veers off and we realize we're okay and life goes back to normal, what happens in your body?
I calm down and I'm more normalized. Yeah. I'm more equalized.
Yeah, exactly. The threat goes away, and so your body comes down. You switch from what's called the sympathetic, which is the fight or flight, to the parasympathetic nervous system, right?
Right.
And your thoughts don't spin anymore because you're not anticipating that threat.
Right.
That is normal anxiety. It's an alarm system that makes you pay attention. The problem is we have been so bombarded by negative news, by uncertainty, by the pandemic, by the changes to our day-to-day life, by the racial injustice that we see on the television playing out, by political polarization, by the isolation. It's too fucking much.
Yeah.
And so what's happened is we have all gotten ourselves in a situation due to the way that life is right now, where you feel like you're about to be hit by a car all the time. There is a nervous system on edge. That's what we call a dysregulated nervous system. And your thoughts are constantly scrambling. Let's take this moment right now. I personally thought we'd be through the pandemic by now.
Yeah, I think most people did.
And we are now in sort of we're 18 months in. I thought the kids would be going back to school. I thought we'd be over the masks. I thought we'd be back to doing big events. I thought that, not that we have to go back to normal, because there's a lot about the old normal that I don't want to go back to. But I kind of feel like, this experience of I was in a great relationship. We broke up. I got my heart broken. I worked hard to get through it and get over it. I finally felt like I was okay again. And now he's back and my life is screwed up again because now I'm head over heels. And then he dumps me again. And now I'm back trying to get over it again. I thought there's an exhaustion to it. And so I'm explaining this in detail because it's not as simple as change your thoughts. It begins with policing your thoughts because your mind and your nervous system are hardwired together. And so there are two different ways you got to attack anxiety. You got to attack both the way it makes your nervous system go like this, because we know based on research, if your nervous system is on edge, your prefrontal cortex doesn't function.
Right.
I mean, if somebody were to walk in here and with a gun and try to rob us, would you be able to do a math problem?
I don't think so.
Yeah, of course not, because your nervous system is like, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. So this part of the brain shuts off. So let's talk first. What can you do to settle your body? Okay. I write about this extensively in this new book. Oh, right.
Your new book is called The High Five. Again, that's why The High Five Habit, which is, it's a really good book. You do talk about this a lot. You talk about how we can conquer our negative thoughts, our stress. I'm going to ask you about the 20 gallons of hot water pretty soon, but finish this. And
so basically, you can use something called the vagus nerve. And a tool that I like to talk about is called high-fiving your heart. So you put your hands right here, right like in the center of your chest over your heart. And you say these three words. You say, I'm okay, I'm safe, I'm loved. I'm okay, I'm safe, I'm loved. And when you put your hands here, you are toning and activating what's called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve runs all the way from your seat to the top of your head, through every major organ, through your vocal cords. And it is the key. It's the switch between your fight or flight state of anxiety and your calm state. And so first things first, you want to develop a practice first thing in the morning, not only of high-fiving yourself in the mirror, which we're going to get to, which is all about self-confidence and self-esteem and self-love and self-worth. But you're also going to wake up every morning, put your hands right here and go, I'm okay, I'm safe, I'm loved. And you're going to say it as many times as you have to, 113, 11 times, 2 times, until you actually feel your body settle down. And you will. You will feel yourself ground back into your body. You will feel something shift. And if you can hear yourself saying those words, I'm okay, I'm safe, I'm loved, it's true in that moment. And by putting your hands right here, this is what activates the vagus nerve. Other things that help you tone the vagus nerve, an ice bath, a hot shower, a hot bath, singing, gurgling, humming, chanting, because it stimulates your vocal cords. And so this is a little tool you can use. I love doing it first thing in the morning, but you can use it anytime you feel anxious to settle yourself back in your body. Then the second tool you're going to use, and this is critical, is you're going to start to interrupt the thoughts that make you feel worried or anxious. And this is really important because if life in general is not putting you on edge, you will absolutely have a thought today that does. They left me on red. They didn't text back. Oh shit, I'm late for that meeting. I haven't finished that thing. Do they like me? What did I do wrong? I feel like I've done something wrong. Like constantly. Right. And so what you want to do is you can use this other thing that I created called the 5-second rule. When you catch yourself drifting into a thought pattern, this just doesn't feel good. You have a choice about whether or not you continue to think that. Count backwards, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's the 5-second rule. You interrupt this negative thought in 5 seconds flat, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The counting backwards gets your prefrontal cortex engaged. And then you go, I'm not thinking about that. I'm not thinking about that. That's the fastest way to interrupt the thought, because most of the stuff you worry about, you've spent a long time in these thought patterns. And so inserting something new isn't going to work right away. First, you have to interrupt the thought, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm not thinking about that. And then when you get really good at interrupting it, because you might have to do this 143 times in one day.
Wow.
They say that you have 50,000 thoughts a day.
Does this work on everybody, though?
Absolutely everybody. Pediatricians around the world are using it with their patients, little kids, in order to teach them and give them a tool to interrupt these thoughts. In fact, I had an entire wing of a psychiatric inpatient unit in Pennsylvania. All the nurses came when I hosted a daytime talk show. And they said that of all the tools that they hand somebody after an inpatient commit, to help them deal, the most effective tool they have is the 5-second rule. Why? Because you can remember it. It's easy to use. And the second you start counting, you interrupt, whether it's negative ideation, suicidal ideation, self-hatred ideation, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm not thinking about that. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm not thinking about that. And so if you do that and just keep interrupting it, what'll start to happen is you'll start to gain self-awareness about that negative dialogue, which creates a little bit of distance. Then you can start to practice new thinking patterns, which I go into in detail in the book, The 5-Second Rule. We have tons of YouTube videos about this. I'm really passionate about this because I struggled with anxiety, was on Zoloft for more than 2 decades.
And are you off of it now?
I'm off Zoloft. It saved my life for sure. I think those kind of drugs are amazing when you find the right one for you. They can turn down the volume on your head. But here's what they don't solve. They don't solve the self-loathing that you feel. That's what the high 5 habit is about. If the 5-second rule, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, helps you interrupt those thoughts so you can teach yourself to stop thinking them, the high 5 habit goes deeper and it teaches you how to stop hating, criticizing, and doubting yourself and how to learn as a default to start loving, supporting, and empowering yourself.
So
boom,
check
that out.
That's amazing. Now, did you figure this out on your own by, again, just trial and error, or did you read about this and kind of did you work with like a neuroscientist? Like how did you kind of like come up with
that?
This
would require planning.
That would require some planning.
No, my brand of helping people is, unfortunately, because it's a painful way to learn, it would have been easier to get a PhD, is screw up your own life and then do what you have to do to fix it. And as you stumble upon things that are working for you and start sharing them. And what I have found, there's this Einstein quote that I love, that if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it. And I think that life is really complicated and everything that I share is so simple, it actually sounds corny and dumb. Like my biggest challenge in teaching people the 5-second rule, or now the high 5 habit, is most people are going to hear about it and say, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Yet when I start to unpack the decades of psychological business success, habit, like all kinds of research that proves what is encapsulated in these teeny little simple sticky tools, it's jaw-dropping.
It is. And you have a lot of research backing it in the book. So then why does the high 5 habit even like work? Were you first of all doing it when you were in a bad place and you were high-fiving yourself?
Yeah, so this is what happened. Okay. So I invented the 5-second rule, for example. Right. When my husband's restaurant business was going under, I was unemployed. We were nearly $1 million in debt and we were about to lose everything. 3 kids under the age of 10, liens on the house, no money in the bank. Just deeply, deeply terrifying moment. I couldn't get out of bed without hitting the snooze button 4 or 5 times and the kids missing the bus. I literally became a person I did not recognize, drinking myself into the ground, screaming at my husband all the time, constantly on edge, panic stricken, the whole thing. And I invented the 5-second rule out of dumb luck as a trick to help me get out of bed. The idea being, if I launched myself out of bed, maybe I wouldn't be in bed when the anxiety hit. That I could move fast enough to beat the depression, the overwhelm, the fear, and the anxiety. And it worked. And that's spread around the world. It's changing millions of people's lives. It's super cool. And the high 5 habit was born out of a very similar experience. So the book is not a pandemic book, but I developed the high 5 habit, or stumbled upon it rather, on a really low morning. That's it. Like, the kids are home. College is imploded. We're in full-blown pandemic mode. My daytime talk show's canceled, so I've been fired from my dream job. I've had a book contract canceled because I haven't turned in the book on time. I start having speeches canceled, so now I'm getting triggered, feeling the financial free fall that we had experienced a decade ago. And I was just overwhelmed. My kids are in breakdown. I'm in breakdown. The world is in breakdown. And I get up one morning and I walk into my bathroom and I'm standing there in front of the sink in my underwear. And I'm brushing my teeth and just sort of on autopilot, not really thinking about anything. And I catch my reflection in the mirror. And I know every woman in particular will relate to this moment. And I know every dude does too. but I see myself and I think, God, you look like hell.
Yes, I think everyone can relate to that.
And then I start picking myself apart because a negative thought is a lot like lint. Once it gathers more and more and more. And so I literally start going, your boobs one size bigger than the other, your gray hair's coming in, your lines on your neck, the bags on your, and then of course I'm like, oh my gosh, I got up late and I've got a Zoom call in 8 minutes and I haven't even walked the dog yet. And I just felt beaten down. And I was doing it to myself. I mean, my thoughts were just like killing me. And I had nothing to say. And I don't know what the hell came over me. I mean, it is the cheesiest thing in the world. But there I am in my underwear without a bra on or even a cup of coffee. And I find myself like raising my hand and high-fiving myself in the mirror. And that very first high five, it's not like it changed my life.
Right.
But what happened is something flipped in me. I went from this nasty, negative, just damaging self-talk to silence and to feeling like, okay, I know it's hard. I got this. Come on, get back out there. And my shoulders went back and I went off on my day. And here's when I knew something was up, because the next morning I woke up and I got out of bed, and I always make my bed right after I get up. And I immediately thought about seeing myself in the mirror. Now, I have probably for the last 45 years either criticized myself or ignored myself in the mirror. I have never looked forward to seeing myself in the mirror. It's sort of like that feeling, like if you're going to go meet a friend for a cup of coffee and you're walking up to the cafe and you've got this feeling of excitement that you're about to see somebody that you like. Mm-hmm. That's how I felt. And so I walk into the bathroom and there's my reflection. And so I had this moment with myself on the second morning where I'm standing there with myself. I'm not criticizing myself. I'm just being with myself. And then I start thinking about the day ahead and how I want to show up. And I raise my hand again. Now, here's the crazy thing when you try it, because I'm on a mission to make everybody on the planet try this thing.
You have a challenge actually going on.
Yes,
today, don't you?
It's called the High Five Challenge. We're getting 5 million people to wake up 5 mornings in a row and start their day with a high five in the mirror, setting an intention, journaling on it, using this simple practice to change the neural pathways in your mind and reset the default programming you have about yourself. It's powerful stuff. Yeah. So here's what's crazy about it. So first of all, when you stand there and you do it, so here's how you do it. You walk into the bathroom, pair it with brushing your teeth, because hopefully everybody's doing that in the morning.
Well, let's hope.
Yes.
Right?
And we're going to habit stack.
Yeah.
So you're going to either do it before the brushing of the teeth or after the brushing of the teeth. And you're going to just take a moment and you're going to be with yourself. That's it. You're just going to look at yourself in the eyes in the mirror. I want you to think about the day ahead. I want you to think about what game you're playing in life. And that's it. Who are you going to be today? How do you want to show up? And then you're going to raise your hand and you're going to high five yourself. Now, here's the first thing you're going to notice. First of all, you're going to notice whether or not you quickly do it and are like, why haven't I been doing this before? Or you're going to notice that you're super resistant to it. And this is what most people feel.
That's what I tried it because, I've been reading your book and I felt weird and strange.
Yeah. Well, here's why. You've never been taught to celebrate yourself. If you're a woman, you've been told that you're a bitch or you're selfish or you are conceited if you do it. To be a good girl, a good friend, a good wife, a good this, a good partner, you're supposed to support everybody else.
Yeah.
You have been actually taught to withhold it from yourself, to give it to yourself last. And so, yeah, it is uncomfortable for most of us. There's an even sadder reason why. And the sadder reason why is you have a story about your past that you're not worthy of it. You have evidence in your mind that you are a piece of shit, or that you are worthless, or that you're a bad person, or that you're unlovable. You look at all the things that you think that you've done wrong, and you think it makes you unworthy of that kind of support and celebration. That's why you look outside yourself for it, for validation in relationships, from likes, from the amount of money you have, the kind of car that you drive. You have to start to figure out how to build the self-worth and the self-love and the self-validation within yourself. The other reason why it is very difficult for people to do this is because you have been trained to believe that if you're not achieving or doing something worthy of celebration, you don't deserve it. And I'm here to say bullshit. If you wake up in the morning and you can stand in front of that mirror and you're still breathing, You deserve and need encouragement and support. You have survived so much stuff, and here you are still standing up, trying a little harder. Are you kidding me?
What's interesting is also, like, and you it talks about this a bit in your book, the amount of evidence for it, right? So talk about what is it called neurobics?
Yeah, isn't that a weird word?
Yeah,
I didn't make that up.
I was
It's
thinking
really weird.
aerobics, neurobics, and about how it's true when you do that with children. There's a whole thing about like how children respond to high-fiving.
Well, first of all, think about what's going viral right now. We're taping this at the beginning of the school year, at least here in the United States. You see all these teachers holding up mirrors, I'm this, affirmations.
That's true.
You see all these teachers high-fiving individual handshakes.
Yep.
Why do we love that?
It's so true. Because it makes people feel good and positive.
And it makes you realize each one of those kids feels seen.
Mm-hmm. That's why they had the mirror so they can see themselves.
Correct.
I saw that. That was such a great piece.
Yeah. And so here's the other thing I want to say. It is actually, it'll feel weird, but you won't think this is weird.
Right.
And here's why. So you've spent your entire life high-fiving other people.
Right.
When you give or receive a high five, what does that physical gesture communicate to somebody?
That they achieved, that they did well, that that they are good, they're great, they're whatever it is, like all the positive.
I believe in you. Let's go.
Yeah.
We got this. I got your back. I celebrate you.
Support.
Keep going. Yes,
support.
and love and so like all of it.
Yeah.
So you've been doing that for everybody else your whole life, and you've done it with this motion. So it's already programmed in your subconscious mind with this motion. So when you go and stand in front of the mirror and your default is to criticize yourself, the second you raise your hand for a high five, the subconscious part of your brain takes over and it marries that programming. I believe in you. I love you. I celebrate you. You got this with your own reflection. It changes how you see yourself.
And I love how that, again, about the kids thing, because I have kids.
Yeah.
You have kids.
First day of school was yesterday.
Right.
So, yeah.
Oh, for mine was a couple weeks ago. But the fact is, like, I like to use that now. I do that with my kids all the time, but now I'm going to be much more conscientious of doing it even more.
Yeah.
Versus just good job. Because
so let me explain the study.
Yeah.
So they did this study where, because of course what happened is I started doing this in my own life. I'm feeling crazy benefits. I post one photo on my story. Within an hour or two, 100 or so people have tagged me and they're doing it. And I'm like, okay, there's something going on here. That's when I dig into the research. That's when I go, whether this is a thing or not a thing, I want to understand why this is working for me, because you can't raise your hand and think I suck.
Right.
Because your brain won't allow it because of the programming associated with the physical movement.
So that's the neurobics part of it.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then the second piece is with this study, they took kids and they wanted to know what's the best way to motivate kids through a very challenging problem, or like that they have to work through. And so the first group of kids get the classic fixed mindset verbal praise. Hey, you're really smart. You're really talented. You're really good looking, like a fixed trait. That's not very motivating. We know that for decades of research. The second group get verbal praise in the form of a growth mindset, which we know is more motivating than traits. You're praising the effort. You talk about it all the time on the show. Praising, oh, great job, keep going, love your perseverance, really hard work. You're praising something the kids can control, which is how much effort they put in, more motivating than just saying you're smart. The third group gets a simple high five from the researcher. No words at all. Just walk up, high five, walk away. That group outperforms the other ones. I don't even know if it was 10-fold, 20-fold, it doesn't even matter. It was so profound that the researchers, when they published the study in an academic journal, called it the motivating power of a high five. Why? The reason why a simple high five is way more powerful than any kind of verbal praise or mantra that you could have is because a high five fulfills your most foundational emotional needs. When you receive a high five, you feel seen. And I'm going to tell you something about it. Like, have you ever given a crappy high five where you like kind of miss the hand? What do? You got to do it again.
You got to do it again.
Because it creates, you have to be intentional about it. There's an intention behind it. So you do feel seen when you get one. You also feel heard. If you get a high five from somebody when you're going through a challenging time and they high five you to try to lift your spirit up, you feel like somebody gets it, you're down. The kids knew, these researchers knew that this was hard.
You feel understood.
Yes. And then you feel celebrated for the unique you that you are. And I'm here to tell you, you can build that relationship with yourself. Those researchers were sharing in the struggle with those kids and were cheering them on. And I'm telling you, practicing the high five habit and the tools in this book, you can absolutely build that partnership with yourself.
So the high five is for personal self-assuredness or confidence. The hand to the heart is more for anxiety.
Yeah,
right?
it's for basically calming down your nervous system.
Right.
Exactly.
And then, so how about with the negative thoughts and all that? What is there can you use the high five for the negative or the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1?
Correct. So that's a way to flip yourself from a negative mindset to a high five attitude.
Okay. So it's the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 for that.
Yeah. And I'm not thinking about that.
And I'm not thinking about that. And that you said works too because it's changing all that.
Absolutely.
Then how about the mantras? I wanted to ask you about this because people always talk about have a mantra, whatever that you say. For me, it never seems to do a damn thing. And I think a lot of people would agree. But you talk about basically creating like a meaningful mantra that actually works.
Right.
So how do you do that? What's the difference?
Oh, there's a big difference. So kind of if you hate your body, I have a daughter that really struggles with how she looks right now.
How old is she?
22.
22.
She's the one with the text in the book who sent me the text seriously while I was writing the book that said, why am I always the ugliest one at the bar?
I saw that text. It was very, very hard to read. It broke my heart when I saw that.
Yeah.
As a mom, especially, it's tough to see that.
And the whole point, and I have her permission to talk about it. And I had her permission to write about it. The text shows that when you get something like that from somebody that you love, it's interesting because that text reveals how she sees the world, not how we see her in the world.
Right.
And it's really important to understand that your experience in life is 1000% determined by what filter you're viewing the world through. And yes, you may have all kinds of evidence that you're overweight right now, or you've let your health go, or that you've done some things that you regret. But how does beating yourself up over it help you change those things? It doesn't.
Right.
In fact, based on the research, we know that being hard on yourself makes it even less likely you're going to change. It's very demotivating. That the most empowering force on the planet is feeling supported and encouraged. And most people who are in a place where they have something that they don't like about their life or their bank account or their pant size or themselves, they spend all day harping on themselves about it instead of flipping it into encouraging and focusing on what they want. So in terms of meaningful mantras, there is no way in hell my daughter, in where she is in her life, is going to stand in front of a mirror and go, I love my body. Should she? Of course she should. Is she the ugliest person in the bar? Are you kidding me? I've tried everything. I follow the experts in this area. I don't ever talk about her body. I talk about her personality, her loyalty, what an incredible friend and daughter and human, her sense of humor, her work, like all of it. She is so focused on how miserable she feels about it that her brain in real time filters the world in a way to go, oh, see, that person's skinnier than me. Boom, more evidence. Completely ignoring that all the other people that she'd actually not be bigger than. Your brain will literally reorganize itself in real time in order to confirm what you believe and what you keep telling yourself. And so back to the mantras, if you don't believe it, your mind rejects it. Seriously. And so you have to start with something that I call meaningful. I probably should have called it pathetic mantras in order to make it stick, because it's not something like, let's say that you think you're a bad person. Okay. You got cheating in your past, or maybe you were abused. You've got childhood trauma. You got all kinds of evidence from your past that makes you stand in front of the mirror and see somebody that does not deserve a high five because you're a damaged person that screws everything up. Okay. What happens when you start to tell yourself that? Maybe somebody told you that when you were growing up. You've thought it so often. You now think it all the time. Just because you've thought it for a long time doesn't mean it has to stay as the default in your mind. That's the other thing that people don't realize, is that at any moment in time, you can get intentional about resetting the default shit that you think in your mind. Just because you're used to it doesn't mean you have to keep thinking it. So if you get in front of that mirror, let me just keep going with this story. So if you have this opinion that you're damaged goods and everything that you do screws up and you're a bad person, let's take a really innocuous example. Let's say that you
Or not good enough. I think it's more about being not good enough.
Oh, I think people's stories, I think that's the thing people say in public. I think that's a nice way to say, I think I'm a piece of shit. I think I'm worthless. I think I'm not good enough sounds okay in polite conversation.
You don't think that social media, though, has played such a screw up in people's minds because they're comparing constantly to other people?
Yeah, but look, social media is a tool.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Too many people have allowed themselves to become the tool. And if you have an issue or a problem with comparison, stop being an asshole about social media to yourself. Go through your feed and get rid of every single account that triggers you. And fill your account with things that actually make you feel good about yourself, that are about where you're going instead of where you're not and where you're lacking. By doing that and curating your own feed to make you feel like shit, you are tripling down on the programming in your brain and making your brain believe, oh, it's important that I feel bad. It's important I see people skinnier than me. It's important that I see people that have more money than me. It's important that I see all these fake relationships online. It's important that I sit here in bed and before I even set my intention or do my morning routine, I spend 30 minutes self-loathing as I look at people's vacations and I make myself wrong about where I'm not. What the fuck are you doing? Seriously. Get rid of those accounts on your feed. If you're unhappy, do something about it. And the fastest way to use social media for good is delete all the crap that makes you feel like horrible about yourself and start putting in things that reinforce the message that you are in control of your life. You can change your life. You can achieve your goals. You can be a happier person. You can heal your trauma. Absolutely. That is 1,000% in your control. You shouldn't be a robot about it. But nobody does. We all just kind of mindlessly consume it because that's how it's designed. But it can be an incredibly powerful tool for good if you're intentional about how you use it.
Right. The curation is actually a very good idea, but people don't take that extra step to do that.
You have to. Unfollow Friday. Unfollow Friday. Every Friday, go through your feed and unfollow people.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, and if you're like, oh, but my Uncle Joe is going to get annoyed if I'm... Mute him. Who gives a shit what your Uncle Joe thinks? Honest to God. Your social media is for you. Stop thinking about what you're broadcasting on social media and start thinking about what you're allowing into your mind.
That's a great one.
Look at the last 5 people you texted. Are those people helping you get where you want to go?
Are you asking me or just...
I'm just saying, there's a test you can do. Look at the last 5 people you texted. Look at the last 5 accounts you liked. Oh, Kim Kardashian, thanks a lot. She's an amazing businesswoman. Amazing businesswoman. Is she actually helping you get where you want to go?
Absolutely. I don't follow her, but I would imagine not. Yes.
Well, I don't know. For some people, maybe. For some people, not. Get serious about your life. At some point, you're going to die. At some point, this whole thing's over. And you're mindlessly walking through this and setting up your whole life to make you feel like shit. And you don't have to. That's the reason, by the way, why you can't stand in front of a mirror and high five yourself, because your whole life has been organized around making you feel bad about yourself. And I'm here to tell you, you can turn this around. You can change your social media feeds. That's number 1. Number 2, you can force yourself to try this stupid thing. Try it for 5 days. Do the high five challenge. Just go to highfivechallenge.com. You can sign up for free. It's super easy. High five yourself in the mirror for 5 days in a row and see what happens. We have a woman who had body dysmorphia for 20 years write to us and say she hasn't looked at herself in 20 years. 5 days of doing this, she can now look at herself and grin because she doesn't see her body anymore. She sees the human being inside.
Wow.
Yeah, we have a woman that wrote to us in a domestic violence shelter saying that, she had just escaped this abusive relationship. She's lost everything. She has so much trauma. But this high five thing has made her realize she still has herself.
Wow.
She can have her own back. And it begins every single morning rebuilding that partnership with yourself. You know, there's only one person that you spend your whole life with.
That's right.
And it's high time you start working on improving the relationship that you have with yourself, because it is the foundation of every relationship that you have. If you feel like shit about yourself, you will allow people into your life who treat you like shit. If you start to empower, encourage, and support yourself, you will build up your self-esteem and worthiness so that you are strong enough to attract and be around the people that you deserve and that deserve you. And I'm not saying that anybody deserves abuse. That's not what I'm saying at all. So do not take that out of context. I'm not saying to you, but
Right.
what I'm saying is you're not responsible for any of the bad shit that's happened to you. You survived it. You are responsible for what happens next. And that's where building a relationship with yourself matters. People don't have boundaries because they can't even look themselves in the eye. So how the fuck are you going to look somebody else in the eye?
Mm-hmm. That's really good advice. And that's, again, very tangible stuff.
Anxiety always begins with a worry. Always. It begins with a thought that is triggered by something. So if you suffer from anxiety, you wake up in the morning and your mind spins, you lay in bed at night and your mind spins, you walk into work and you feel anxious in your body. Interestingly, another major trigger is being home or going home and that moment right before your partner walks in the door. If you feel anxious when your partner's about to walk in or you're about to walk into your own home, that is a major signal that you are in the wrong relationship, that there is something incredibly off and you either need to get into counseling, but that is one that we hear a lot about.
Wow.
Because you're walking into a situation that feels uncertain.
Yeah.
A lot of people, by the way, had parents that were abusive or parents that were yellers. So they also are experiencing ghosts from the childhood of it's 5 o'clock, dad's about to come home and pour a drink and everybody's on edge.
Yeah.
So write down the triggers, okay? Because having kind of the triggers ahead of time will help you come up with a plan for how you're going to catch yourself when your mind defaults to the automatic ways that it thinks. Then what I want you to write down next to the trigger is what exactly are you worried about? So having the trigger and then what do I worry about? I worry that my boss is going to yell. I worry that my partner's going to yell. I worry that I'm going to get in trouble. I worry that, my friends are going to laugh at me. I worry that I'm going to be whatever the it may be. Then what you're going to do is you're going to write down what I call an anchor thought. An anchor thought is something that weighs you down and it makes you excited. And so here's how the strategy works with the 5-second rule. The next time you're in a situation, and let's just use the example of pulling into your own driveway or your own apartment, and maybe you've got issues with your boyfriend or girlfriend or your roommate, and that makes you unsettled. The second you pull in and you feel the trigger, you're going to go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, because I want to interrupt your mind from going into the I don't like what if I, and then you're going to drop in the anchor thought of the last time that you and your roommate really got along well, or the last time that you stood up for yourself and it went fine. And
or your puppy.
Yeah, or a puppy or whatever. And you're going to say, I'm so excited to deal with this.
Yeah.
And then you're going to get out of your car, even though your body is going to feel a little unsettled and your mind's going to race. Go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you start to be like, but what? And then walk in the door. And what I'm teaching you to do is to not let your mind hijack you.
Right.
And it's very important because there's a very tight nexus between your habit of worrying and spiraling your thoughts and the way your body starts to amp up. And so we want to settle your mind so we don't agitate your body. You got it?
Yeah.
And so if you start to practice that over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and for you 18-year-olds that are watching this, use this with the nerves that you have about what you're going to do with your life. Use this when you catch yourself worrying about college applications, because worrying about the applications won't get them done. Worrying about what your friends are doing won't make it happen. Worrying about what you're going to be doing when you're 25 or how you're going to make money, it's not going to help you make money right now. It's only going to make you miserable.
Right.
So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, cut off that habit.
Yeah.
That'll stabilize your body, and then go to a vision of you at the age of 25, driving a car that you think is cool and hanging out with a friend that's cool and saying to yourself, I'm so excited because I know I'm going to figure it out. Because you don't need to worry about that right now.
Yeah.
But it becomes a habit that destroys your year this year.
Dr. Kennedy says you can heal your anxiety once and for all. Yeah, sure, you're going to have moments where anxiety rise up and, you're going to have stressful situations. But in terms of the ongoing overwhelm, nervousness, on edge feeling, he's going to teach you how to heal that. His work is life-changing. And it has made a huge difference in my life. And I cannot wait for you to meet him in a few minutes. Now, the interesting thing about anxiety is that I am considered one of the world's leading experts on anxiety. And I'm what you call a life-tested expert because my expertise has been earned the hard way, the painful way. And that is by living through and struggling with anxiety for almost 45 years. The truth is, when I really think about my past, I don't ever remember a time when I wasn't nervous or feeling on edge or anxious or somewhere other than the room that I was currently standing in. I think if you can come out of the womb as a baby having a panic attack, that was Mel Robbins. And that panic that I was, I think, hardwired with in my nervous system, it only grew as I got older. In fact, you know how you go to those little camps when you're little, like with the Y, or, maybe you go to Girl Scout camp. I was so homesick at every single camp my parents tried to send me to, I would be sent home. In fact, there is this really infamous story about me in sixth grade. So in sixth grade at North Muskegon Elementary School, there's this huge crescendo at the end of the year. And the entire sixth grade takes over the Boy Scout and Girl Scout camp that's like 10 miles away. And everybody goes to camp for 5 days and 4 nights. And it is supposed to be the most amazing thing that happens during elementary school. Everybody talks about going to sixth grade camp. Here's the thing about Mel. I was so riddled with anxiety and panic while I was there that I called my parents every single day and begged for them to come and get me. I was so out of control that the counselors actually acquiesced and said I could go home. Now, I want you to stop and think about that. Do you know how anxious you have to be to get trained counselors to basically go, this kid is out of control? We can't handle this. We got to get her out of here. Get her parents to come pick her up. Like, I can't deal with this. And so I got what my anxiety wanted. I got to leave. And as I was packing up my cabin, my friends came in. They're like, where are you going, Mel? Tonight's the big scavenger hunt. It's the last night. Why are you leaving? I lied to them and said, oh, my grandmother's had a heart attack. So my parents are coming. We got to go. We got to go see her. Yep. That was sixth grade Mel, full of anxiety. And it only got worse as I got older. In fact, before every track meet or tennis match that I had to play as a varsity athlete, I had such a nervous stomach. That was the term that was used back in the early 80s. She has a nervous stomach. Well, you know how I dealt with my nervous stomach? I would stand behind like a bush next to the tennis courts. And I would have this blue bottle packed in my backpack. It was a blue bottle of Melanta. This is an antacid medicine that old people drink for reflux. I would chug that stuff. It got so bad that my parents would start buying that stuff by the case. It was disgusting and chalky, but I chugged it anyway. Honestly, I can't believe I'm admitting this to you right now. And here's the thing, it only got worse. I mean, little elementary school anxiety Mel turned into high school anxiety Mel. And then, of course, I was college train wreck anxiety Mel. I don't even want to admit half the things I did in college when I was anxious, like jumping from one relationship to another, or waking up every single morning with anxiety full of regrets about the night before. You know, when I stop and think about, oh my God, I feel like I need Melanta right now. My stomach is starting to be like, and I laugh about it. But honestly, at the time, it's sad. Like, I just didn't enjoy college. I don't even like to go to college reunions because I did not like the person that I was back then, as my anxiety was just raging out of control. Well, when I got to law school, thankfully, the anxiety got so unbearable that I got medical help, and I was finally diagnosed with anxiety. And this would have been in the early 90s. And so anxiety was not a word that people threw around casually back then. I mean, anxiety meant there was something terribly wrong with you. People didn't talk about it. If you went to therapy, you were a freak. And so thankfully for me, though, this diagnosis, it was a godsend because I finally had a word and a doctor validating what I had been struggling with for my entire life for 20 years. He prescribed Zoloft. It was a complete game changer for me. It's almost like that medication acted like a ladder. You see, the anxiety and all the mental spiraling that it caused, that spiraling put me in a very deep hole mentally, physically, and spiritually. And that Zoloft was like a little ladder that allowed me rung by rung to start to climb out of that hole and do the work that you need to do to start to take control of your life. So I took Zoloft for 20 years. In fact, the only time I didn't take Zoloft was when our first daughter, Sawyer, she's now 23 years old. So when she was born, I had been off Zoloft. I had to taper off of it because we didn't know if you could like breastfeed or whatever on that medication. They know now it's safe to breastfeed with it. But when she was born, I had such severe postpartum depression, the really scary kind, where you couldn't be left alone because the doctors were afraid you were going to hurt yourself or you were going to hurt your baby. It was a terrifying 8-week experience in my life. And so I'm telling you, between the 45 years of dealing with my own anxiety and on top of it, Chris and I having kids that have had anxiety that at times were so severe that they slept on the floor of our bedroom, I just always thought, okay, I have anxiety. That's the way that it is. It's just the way that I'm wired. I hate it. I hate having anxiety, but I just have to learn to live with it. I was wrong. You do not have to hate anxiety, and you do not have to just learn to live with it. You can learn how to understand it, and you can learn simple things that will help you take control of it and change how you respond to moments of uncertainty and moments of stress. And so in my early 40s, the anxiety got so crippling again because there were a lot of things going on in our life that were triggering it, that every single morning the alarm would go off and I would lay in bed for an hour and I would just stare at the ceiling. And the anxiety, it's almost like it felt like a gravity blanket pinning me to that bed. And as I would lay in that bed and think about all my problems, time would tick by. The kids would miss the bus. I became a person I didn't even recognize. But I want to just tell you that I know what it's like when anxiety is ruining or running your life. Because when anxiety was at its worst for me, I created this thing called the 5-second rule. And it was out of sheer desperation and fear that I created this thing. What is it? It's a brain hack. And if you ever feel overwhelmed by anxious thoughts or anxious feelings, just count backwards, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you can interrupt those thoughts and feelings and then physically move. And ever since I invented this thing, I've been teaching the 5-second rule on stages around the world, and it has changed the lives of millions of people. It's so easy to catch somebody's anxiety. And so I wanted you, Chris, to address some of these questions, because the first question was, do you ever catch my anxiety when I get anxious?
No.
Break down what you do. If I start getting anxious, like I did on Sunday, or I have throughout our 24-year marriage, what do you do? Because you have this superpower of being able to remain calm. And the thing that I find the most validating is, even though you don't feel anxious, you are able to validate my reality of being anxious, even though you're not in the same reality.
Touch is huge, right?
What do you mean touch?
Meaning being able to hold your hand or being close and upfront and personal to what you're experiencing, just pulling what you're feeling out of your mouth. Like that that act of inviting you to describe what's going on, to give detail to it, and to almost not let up, to keep like pulling a thread, like what else is going on? What else is there? What else are you feeling? And I think maybe part of the reason why I don't get triggered by it in that moment is because I've seen it work so effectively that once you get it all out,
It's like barfing.
it dissipates. It may not just extinguish itself, but it will go away.
So technique number one is to give somebody a hug or hold their hand, center them with physical touch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sit up close in front of them. Make sure that you have the as much eye contact as you can have physically with that person.
And then the second thing you do is give people the questions that you might start asking the person in your life that's feeling anxious.
Well, I would start with, tell me about your anxiety right now. What are you feeling? What's happening? Not only physically in your body, but of course emotionally. I mean, those are the two main pillars.
And then you keep going and anything else. And he does that over until I'm literally like the tank is completely empty. You know what else I've noticed, and I think this is a really important thing, is that you don't respond to what comes out of my mouth.
No answers. You cannot provide any direction or guidance or go for the solve.
Why?
Because there is no solve, particularly when you're in the acute moment. Nothing is going to resolve that right there and then, even if you have the most best, idea ever.
What is it that you've observed when you get somebody back to zero and in the moment? What do you observe in the person?
People coming back to right now, and how that is in and of itself is such a powerful grounding mechanism. When you're right here, you're out of your head. You're not thinking about yesterday or tomorrow or wherever the source of that anxiety may be coming from. You're present to your physical space and surroundings, and that, I think, I know it has a profound effect on calming it, not necessarily extinguishing it, but certainly calming it.
I think that's your superpower. I really do. Like, you are the most grounded, calm person in my life. I wonder if it's the years of having a meditation practice and being a practicing Buddhist that has trained that skill in you.
I've never sat down to think about where it comes from necessarily, but yes, in Buddhist tradition or practices, completely just being in observance and the act of deep listening, not just, opening your ears, but really listening for what is being said is totally, that's right up a Buddhist alley for sure.
Wow. Now I know why our kids like you more. I'm more fun, but you're the one that grounds us all. What is your definition of anxiety, Dr. Kennedy?
Anxiety for me is anxious thoughts of the mind. Anxiety is not painful itself. What's painful is this sense of alarm that's in our body, that's in our system. And it's the alarm that drives the thoughts, because it's a very atypical way, especially as a doctor and a neuroscientist, to look at anxiety as more as a body issue, like old unresolved wounding that just making sense through the mind, because the mind is this compulsive meaning-making, make sense machine. So when it feels the alarm in your body from the old wounds that haven't been resolved, it makes sense of it by worrying, warnings, what ifs, worst case scenarios. And that's what happens.
Let me see if I can unpack that. So for you, you said anxious thoughts, like anxiety is sort of those spiral of thoughts.
Yeah.
But truly, the genesis of it is unresolved trauma or issues from your childhood that is stored in the body?
Typically, yeah.
Okay. Where does anxiety come from?
It comes from that alarm in your body, because typically what happens with people with chronic anxiety is normal. Anxiety over taxes, anxiety over your kids, that's normal. But if it's every day, if it's relentless, like that kind of anxiety is abnormal. That typically comes from sort of unresolved stuff from your childhood. And it's stuck in your body and in your mind to some extent. It's a tough call, because when you say anxiety is in your body, of course it's in your nervous system, which of course is your body and your mind. So it's really finding that place of unresolved wounding, that trauma that still sits in you, because that's the engine of what's driving your thoughts. So rather than thinking of anxiety as a thought-based process, it's actually a feeling-based process that's only kind of reflected by the mind. But we assume that it's the mind because we're so fixated on the mind in our society. So it's really a body-based issue, but we focus on the mind and we try and fix it through the mind. And that's why people are in therapy for 30 years and they're not getting a lot better.
That was so succinct what you just said, because what really went thunk for me was when you said anxiety is a feeling issue, but our mind tries to make sense of what we're feeling in our bodies. And we have had this approach forever in the world, that we try to change or fix the thoughts in our mind with our mind. And what you're saying, which to me is revolutionary, is no. Let's forget the mind for a minute and let's drop into the body and let's talk about the feelings that are triggering this spiral of thoughts.
Yeah.
Is that a good summary?
That's a great summary.
I've spent the better part of my lifetime living with all of this unrest and unease and on-edgeness in my body. And I have tried for decades to make sense of it, to calm it, to soothe it, to heal it through my mind. And it is a revelation to realize, whoa, it really starts with thinking about the body. And so I want to ask you one more question, and then we're going to kind of jump into the questions for the listeners, which will allow us to go really deep into this topic. If it begins, which I agree with you, with this sort of stored experience in your nervous system, this stored experience and these feelings that get triggered in you, how do you know if what you're experiencing in your life right now is anxiety versus just day-to-day stress versus overwhelm?
I think if it's chronic, like if you're looking at your life, if you wake up in the morning and you're going, oh my God, I've got this, and this, which you've talked about before on the podcast, like waking up with this sense of dread, that's a sign that things aren't quite right. And anxiety is one of those things. I get messages from people all the time that say, I didn't actually know I had anxiety until I read your book. It's like, well, I don't know if I'm doing you any favors as far as that kind of stuff goes. But really, though, I get that all the time, because I think that we live in our minds, we live in our bodies. This just becomes normal. And unless it rises above this kind of critical mass where we're like uncomfortable almost all the time, then we think, well, there's something going on. And now with Instagram, with all this stuff, like everything's trauma now. Everything's trauma. And I watched your episode about healing childhood trauma, and I really want to dive into that as well, because it's so important. Because the quick version is, you probably had trauma as a child that was unresolvable for you as a child. Now, what happens is when we get trauma as children, we blame ourselves. There's a great saying that says, if you abuse, neglect, or abandon a child, the child doesn't stop loving the parent, they stop loving themselves. And then that starts the split. And then we start judging, abandoning, blaming, and shaming ourselves from that point forward. And that split causes this sense of alarm that gets lodged in our body. And then because we don't want to feel that alarm in our body, we go up into our heads, which is the only place that a child can go, because they're pretty powerless in their environment, and they overthink. And that's a temporary escape. And then we train ourselves as children to overthink, because that's the only safe places in our minds. And then when we get older, go through a couple divorces, you get in a car accident, whatever, that stuff tends to come right back up again. So that's really the basis of where this global anxiety kind of comes from in people, is it's this unresolved trauma, and your parents love you, and you've got, a supportive family, and you're attuned and connected, and quote unquote securely attached, you can go through traumas like we all do in childhood, and they won't impact your nervous system to create this permanent change. Or I don't like using the word permanent because it makes it feel like it's hopeless, but it creates a permanent change in your nervous system. And trauma is anything that changes your nervous system, that stucks your nervous system in a pattern that doesn't allow you to get out of that trauma. And then we just get into this loop where there's alarm in our body. We make sense of it by making horrible thoughts in our mind, warnings, what ifs, worst case scenarios, which of course makes the alarm of the body worse, which of course makes the thoughts worse. And we get caught in this alarm anxiety cycle. And unless we see it, we can't get out of it.
Okay, a few weeks ago, Kendall interrupted me while I was on a Zoom therapy session. I'm trying to train you that when I'm on a Zoom call, that you're going to get filmed. This will work. And after she left the room, I told my therapist, she does this to me a lot. I'll tell her that I'm going to be in a meeting for an hour, and 25 minutes into the meeting, she comes into the office. She asks me something very inconsequential that doesn't really matter. Like, when are we having dinner? Or do you know where this is? Something that could have waited. And it kind of frustrates me. It drives me crazy. And my therapist told me, oh, well, that's a classic thing that people do. It's called borrowing functioning. And I'm like, what? I'd never heard of it. Had you ever heard of it? And it's when you feel a moment of anxiety or boredom or some uncomfortable feeling. And instead of being able to just ground yourself down and give yourself the soothing or the support that you need, you borrow that functioning that you don't have for yourself by going to somebody else. So by interrupting me in a moment where maybe she felt a little insecure, a little bored, a little distracted, maybe you wanted to procrastinate, instead of giving herself what she needed to get back on track, she finds somebody else to give her what she needs. She's seeking a little reassurance. She's seeking to be told everything's okay. Is that right?
Yeah, some of the times.
So what have you noticed since, because I wanted to make this video because Kendall just said to me, you know, ever since that conversation we had about borrowing functioning, I noticed something. So what did you notice?
I was just saying that ever since she told me that it like pissed her off that I would interrupt her, I've stopped coming up to her office during the days. At least when I know she's busy. Like today I even opened the door and I heard her in her recording voice talking, and so I was like, okay, I'm just gonna shut the door. Whereas normally I would just like come up and try to like do some signal to her or something stupid, but I don't really understand where the psychology comes in. I've just regulated it and kind of shut it down. I don't bother you as much anymore.
Well, is it that you don't bother me, or is it that you've noticed that you didn't actually need me in that moment?
Yeah, a bit of both. I mean, a lot of the times I'm just bored and I want company. And I'm like, what's up? It's not even about being anxious necessarily.
Well, that is kind of an uncomfortable feeling, to be bored and to be alone. And not knowing how to deal with boredom or being alone is why we seek a distraction. And for some people, the distraction is going and finding somebody else, which is totally fine. For other people, it might be drinking or vaping or, you know, having some weed because you want to soothe that uncomfortable feeling. Mm-hmm. And it's not that I don't want you to interrupt me. Absolutely. I want you to come up here. It makes me sad to think you wouldn't come up to the office because you think that I'm too busy for you. That's not the point at all. The point is, in those moments where I take the time to say, hey, I'm going to be on a phone call for an hour, or I'm doing a speech live for a client, knowing that in those moments, there's still the desire to check in, the desire to interrupt, the desire to...
Yeah, well, also I come to you because you don't get mad. You're like, hey, what's up? Whereas like when I go interrupt Dad, he's like, yes.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because when it happened in therapy, during that therapy call, my therapist said, well, you realize you just invited her. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, when she opened the door and said, you're busy, you said, come on in. And you're very welcoming. And I said, well, of course I was.
Well, do you want me to come in and say, are you busy? Or do you not want me to come in?
I think if I've told you that I need the hour, unless there's an emergency, I'd rather you not come in.
You don't always tell me, like, hey, from 9 to 5 today, I'm going to be on and off Zoom calls. Don't come in. Like, whenever you have a speech or you have some big meeting, you text in our family group chat and you're like, don't come up. And I don't.
Yep.
But, like, throughout the day.
No, I love for you to poke your head in. And if I kind of hold up the hand, it means I'm in the middle of something.
Got it.
And I also, when she said to me, what if you would have turned to Kendall when she opened the door and said, I told you I was going to be in a meeting for an hour. I was like, I couldn't say that to her. And she said, why?
Well, I would be like, geez.
Right?
I'd be like, whoa, okay.
I know. And she said, well, that's part of the problem, is that you're not establishing healthy boundaries between you two. You have allowed yourself to become the coping mechanism that she uses when there's a feeling that she's not comfortable with. And by saying, I told you I needed an hour, I'll be out in 20 minutes, it also reminds you that you can rely on yourself to get yourself through those moments of boredom. What do you think?
Makes sense.
I don't know if I could say that to you, though, because I feel like it's a rejection.
It's not. You're fine.
Okay, I'll try it. Oh, I love you.
I love you too.
My therapist, the GOAT, Keith, he's awesome. He's in California, so we Zoom. And he's just this, like, super chill, spiritual guy. Used to be a surfer. Like, he's just, like, the coolest dude ever. And I love him because he's, like, such a smiley guy, and he's just, like, fun. And he's taught me all this stuff. And so, I guess this segue, and he basically, like, helped me. Actually, our beginning lessons were a lot on purpose and like what I am going to do about this thought process. And we came to the conclusion that, or I guess I came to the conclusion with his help, that life does not matter. But us as individuals can make it matter by using purpose and finding our purpose. And so what I discovered with him is that, like, these thoughts about life not mattering are going to be here. But that doesn't mean they're going to stay, because over time, when I live my life, I'm going to discover what the reason is, or the reason why I want to be here.
Yeah, and why you matter.
And it doesn't have to change anything, and it doesn't have to do anything, but I'm just, like, looking for my purpose and, like, my reason to be like, well, that's why I'm here, and that's why I want to live, and that's why, like, stuff like that.
So I just want to see if you can go a little deeper in explaining something. Because when you first started working with your therapist, Keith, you were in the middle of these catastrophic, kind of overwhelming, scary thoughts. And it's interesting that where you guys started was with the topic of purpose. And I understand that this was happening in parallel with a medical doctor giving you a antidepressant to kind of act like a ladder to help you stabilize.
Still on them.
Still on them,
Still
baby.
great. Still taking them. Guys, they're great.
Okay. But what was it about the topic of purpose that really helped you see your way through these scary and overwhelming thoughts? Because the other thing that I've read about the research of this is that this is very common, whether you're triggered by thinking about things like climate change, or if you're thinking about racism or systematic discrimination, or you are experiencing extreme poverty, or you lose somebody that you love, it can lead you to deeply contemplate the meaning of life. And people that are more empathetic or introverted tend to do this more, but it can happen to anybody. And so I found it really interesting that it was a conversation about purpose that helped you start to gain more control about the way that you were thinking. So can you explain how that helped you?
Yeah. I feel like what our conversation about purpose did for me was that even though at this point in time, I felt like life had no meaning and there was nothing to really like be alive for, the conversation about purpose kind of strengthened a thought in my mind about how that at one point in my life, I'll do something or I'll meet someone or I'll go somewhere that will just like give me this feeling of belonging and a reason to live and a reason to be here. And that will be like my reason to be on this earth. And like one day I'll be like, hey, this thing that I've discovered about myself that I really like is like my reason to be here. And this is why I'm on this earth.
Can I go a little deeper?
Yeah.
Because at the time that this was happening, how would you describe your relationship with your family?
Good.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like my relationship has always been good. So
Yeah.
it was good.
And did you have friends?
Plenty. I even had a girlfriend.
And did you enjoy school?
Loved it. Still do.
So the only thing about your life that wasn't working were these thoughts.
Yeah, these thoughts, it's not even that it fully clouded my judgment. I still loved my friends and you guys and everybody in my life, but I just didn't see why that mattered.
Because you have all this stuff handled and now your mind is starting to take you to these dark places.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. And I think that's important because it just goes to show you no matter what's happening on the outside in somebody's life, they seem like they're enjoying school. They have a great girlfriend. They've got good friends. They have a family that they're connected to, that their thoughts might actually still be a very scary place.
Yeah.
And I wanted to point that out because you just can't assume that you know what somebody's reality really is. I mean, I didn't even know.
Nobody did.
Not in 9th grade.
No. Well, yeah.
I mean, I knew very well in sophomore year.
Yeah.
But I also find it very interesting because when you believe that you are here for a reason and that your life is leading you somewhere, that there is something unique for you to discover that's on the road ahead, might be tomorrow, might be a year from now, might be 10 years from now, might be longer from now.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of approaching life like it's almost like a gift that you unwrap to discover what's inside. That thought was like a seed that he planted that has taken root.
Yeah.
Because I hear you talking a lot, pretty frequently, about purpose.
It's like my personality now. All of my friends and like everybody I talk to at some point, we always come into this conversation where I'm like, you know, I'm actually like, I don't see a reason to living and I'm actually looking for purpose. And they're like, what?
You're a really intellectual guy. Because I would label this an existential crisis, which is basically questioning existence.
Yeah.
That's what happened to you. And that happens to a lot of people. It's a very normal thing, and so are big and scary thoughts. Thank you for telling me that.
So first of all, I literally have struggled with anxiety my entire life. And anxiety for this conversation, the way I define it is the habit of worrying spiraled out of control. You know, you may say that you are a worrier. That's not true. You have a habit of worrying. A habit is a pattern of behavior or thinking that you repeat without realizing it. So anxiety happens when that pattern of worrying about things spirals out of control, and now it starts to marry and manifest itself with physical sensations too. That's all that it is. I know that I say that's all that it is. Me personally, I struggled with anxiety, I think my entire life. It became quite acute when I was in my late teens and early 20s. I became medicated in the middle of law school. I took Zoloft for 2 decades. When our first daughter was born, who is now 17, the postpartum depression and the cascading panic was so terrible that not only was I medicated and couldn't breastfeed, but I couldn't be left alone with her.
Wow.
So when I say you can cure yourself of anxiety, I don't say that lightly. 4 years ago, after I had been using the 5-second rule to change my behavior, how I spoke to my husband, how I negotiate in business meetings, how I conduct sales, the kind of parent that I am, my health habits, my eating habits, curbing the drinking, I thought, I wonder if I can use this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 thing to get control of my thought patterns. Not my behavior patterns, my thought patterns. Yes, you can. Wow. So we're gonna build this conversation because I want to start with something we can all relate to, and that is, how do you stop worrying and how do you stop listening to self-doubt? This is how you're going to do it. So all day long, you're going to have moments where your thoughts drift, and I use that word on purpose because for me, there is a physical sensation when you start to use the 5-second rule and you start to wake up. Not only on time in the morning, but you wake up to your life and the opportunities in your life. Your thoughts drift. Like you'll just be hanging out with your friends and then suddenly you're like, I'm not sure that person likes me anymore. I haven't heard from my kids lately. I wonder if they're dead or, as a check, like you just start worrying about stuff. Why? Because it's a habit. Because when you're not paying attention, your brain shifts from you being a decision maker and paying attention to you just kind of spinning things on autopilot. And one of your habits is worrying. The second you wake up and you notice, holy cow, I'm talking some negative garbage to myself right now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You've just shifted the part of the brain that you're using. You've shifted from the basal ganglia, which is where your habit loops are spinning, and you've awakened your prefrontal cortex. You've also interrupted that pattern. Now what you're going to do, because your mind is actually ready to receive a different thought because of the counting, now you can put in an anchor thought. Like if you have a mantra, if you've got a vision about the way that your business is going to turn out in 5 years, if you just have a thought that makes you really happy and proud, insert that. Now, why does this work? It works because of the counting. And I'm not kidding. We know, based on research, that positive thinking alone, not effective. In some instances, trying to force yourself to think positive can actually make the worries worse. Why? Well, the reason why is because it's really hard to just change the channel. What we have to do first is basically interrupt it and turn off the TV and then turn it back on with the prefrontal cortex awakened. So the counting is essential. And so you can start using this today. You catch yourself talking garbage to yourself, because we all know if I were to put a speaker on your head and broadcast, you would be sitting here in the audience, you'd be in an insane asylum because the crap that you say to yourself is insane. And the problem is we listen to it. You'll be in a sales meeting and you'll be undermining yourself. They're not going to buy. Oh my gosh, I'm in trouble. You're not even present. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Switch it back. Get back to that vision that you have about toasting your success or this customer being really happy or you being proud of yourself. Whatever that vision may be, you can control your thoughts. And this is not just us talking about it. This is a tool that you can use. So let's take it a step further. So worrying, if you let it go unchecked, what will happen is you will get used to worrying. You will get used to living in a state where you're slightly agitated all the time. Let me talk a little bit about agitation. So what we know based on research is that physically, in your body, so physiologically, being excited is the exact same thing as being afraid. Let me say that again because it is so important. In your body, being excited is the exact same thing as being afraid. Your body doesn't know the damn difference. Your heart races, your armpits sweat, you're like, you may get tight in your throat. Your cheeks may get pink like mine do when I get excited. The only difference between excitement and fear is what your brain says. And the problem is if you have a habit of worrying, guess what you're going to tell yourself is going on? That you're like freaking out, that you're not excited, that something must be wrong. Oh gosh, why would you say something's wrong? Because you got a habit of saying that all the time. Even as I became a speaker for a living, or I'd be on CNN, when I first started doing it, I would be freaking out backstage. But even though, like, you know, just last week, he's standing backstage, about to go on, 8,000 people, heart races, armpit sweat, you know, my hands get clammy. I'm not nervous though, not at all. I'm excited. And so I developed this technique, and research out of Harvard, not based on my technique, but something very similar, proves that if you basically, right before you're about to do something, take a test, run a race, public speaking, a business negotiation, ask somebody to marry you, whatever it may be that gets your heart racing, just do this. Go, I'm excited. I'm excited to give that speech. I'm excited to ask him or her. I'm excited to do this race. I'm excited. Because what happens is you give your brain context, so your brain doesn't escalate the stuff going on in your body. Your brain's not worried. Make sense?
Yeah.
So you can combine this with the 5-second rule. So we know how to do worrying. You catch your thoughts drift, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, anchor thought. If you start to feel your heart racing, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to awaken the prefrontal cortex, and then start going, I'm really excited to do this. I'm really excited to do this. Another technique that you can use is ask, I think they call it interrogatory questions, where instead of giving yourself a pep talk, say, well, why am I ready to do this? Why am I ready? Because that'll force you to answer the question, which then convinces you. So why am I ready to close this sale? Why am I ready to give this speech? Why am I ready? So those are two strategies that you can use backed by science that are proven to actually make your performance be much better. Now let's take it a step further to anxiety. So anxiety is what happens when the habit of worrying spins out of control, your body gets really agitated, and then you allow your mind to escalate it into a full-blown panic attack. So for those of you that have not had the pleasure of having a panic attack, let me explain what it's like. So have you ever been in your car and you're driving down the road and you go to change lanes and all of a sudden there's like, oh my God, there's a car right there, right? And you swerve a little bit and then your heart's like, and you may sweat a little bit and you grip the wheel really tight and you're super locked in on the road ahead of you. But then that car pulls away and the near miss scenario passes and your mind starts going, okay, you're all right now.
Right.
You're all right now. That's it. That's all. That's what a panic attack is, only it happens while you're standing in front of your coffee pot. Seriously. You have that same, oh my God, what behind that? And your heart's racing, and the problem for your brain is that your brain can't look around and say, holy cow, we almost got hit by a car.
Right.
Your brain's saying, what the hell is wrong with her? She's making coffee and she's freaking out. And so now your brain has a problem. Because what's your brain's job? It's designed to protect you. So your brain will now do whatever it can to magnify the problem. Remember we talked about the spotlight effect? It'll start telling you all kinds of crazy stuff because it can't figure out contextually what the hell's going on. She's just making coffee, now her heart is racing and she's breathing really. Holy cow, maybe she is having a heart attack. A lot of people that have panic attacks say, I think I'm dying, oh my God, what's happening? Wow. Or you'll see them do the deer in the headlights thing where they got to get out of the room. That is the spotlight effect in your brain, now taking control and magnifying everything to get you out of whatever it was. So here's how you use the 5-second rule. You use it to stabilize your thoughts before the panic escalates. And then what happens is it drifts into worry and then it disappears. Right. So the second you feel worry, you catch it, you train yourself to do that. If you start feeling yourself getting, your heart racing, you can 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and use the I'm excited. If that doesn't work, literally 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and just give yourself an anchor thought, literally, of you being okay.
I have had a lifelong history with anxiety. I was a worrier as a kid, homesick at every camp that I ever went to. In fact, when we went to 6th grade camp at my little public high school, go away for like 5 days, I was so disassociated and freaked out so badly that I lied to the camp and told them that my grandmother, there had been some sort of family emergency. First, I get them to let me use the camp phone so I can call my parents. Then I hang up and tell them that there's been a terrible tragedy in the family and that my grandmother has fallen gravely ill, convincing my parents to show up.
Right.
And then when my parents show up and my friends ask me, why are you leaving early? I lie to them and tell them, that there's been this emergency and that I have to go, when in fact, my panic and anxiety drove me to great lengths to get out of that situation. And so when I say I struggled with anxiety, I mean, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder when I was 22 years old in law school. That should have been a hint that I didn't like law school, right? But I went on Zoloft and I took it for 2.5 decades. And I only came off it when I discovered the 5-second rule and started using it to change my physical habits and then my mental habits. I stopped taking Zoloft when I was 45 and hadn't been on it for, I don't know how old, 7 years now. But when the pandemic hit and I was suddenly off airplanes and I was no longer racing around from a speech or wherever, and I had to sit and be with myself, that came roaring back in.
Yeah, terrifying.
And what I realized is I never understood how dysregulated my nervous system was. And it was having to be still that made me realize that I literally will dart to Target or run to a coffee shop or make a phone call or swipe through social media as a way to distract myself from having to just be.
Even though you have a husband who's a Buddhist and an avid meditator.
Well, that's his Buddhism and meditation does not smooth out my dysregulated nervous system.
You're not absorbing that by osmosis.
No, it's the reason why we're still married. Right. He would have divorced my ass a long time ago if he wasn't meditating and Buddhist, because he wouldn't be able to deal with me.
My favorite story about your anxiety is in the new book, which we're going to talk about, the High Five Habit. And it's the story of you getting the job with the Michigan AG and being assigned to write this paper on recidivism and just not doing it at all. And then the day that you're called into his office, just not showing up and completely ghosting him.
Yes. Yes, it's true. Like when I think back to what a train wreck of a human being I was, I cannot believe I made it through college and law school and basically was upright for as long as I was. The story that Rich is talking about is at this point, I was not diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. I was just a person who was a complete fuck up. I was drinking too much, trying to regulate my nervous system. I hated law school. So I go home for the first year summer. What did you do your first year of law school for?
I worked for a nonprofit in San Francisco.
Did you know when you were in law
terrible.
school that you didn't want to be a lawyer?
100%.
Yes. And I think so many people get into this position too, whether you're in a relationship or a job or a major or a neighborhood or whatever, where you know you're in the wrong place.
Right. But there's so much inertia behind it. And the idea of stepping out of it is so fraught and terrifying that it's easier to just keep going. I mean, I would say I actually enjoyed being in an academic environment and I needed, I was coming out of living in New York City where I was just a wild man and I needed some of that structure because I knew what to do every day. And I was capable in that regard. So I actually didn't mind like going to class and the kind of, sort of social environment that it provided, but I had no interest in being a lawyer. I didn't even know what that meant. Even when I graduated from law school, I still didn't know what being a lawyer meant. It doesn't really teach you that part.
Well, I guess because there's so many things that you can do being a lawyer.
Yeah.
But so back to the summer, I'm living back home in Western Michigan. I grew up in Muskegon, Michigan, and I'm driving 50 miles a day each way to go to the Attorney General's office in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And at the very beginning of the summer, the AG selects me to do a massive research paper about recidivism rates in the state of Michigan. Basically, he wants, at the end of the summer, it gets worse. He wants to make a massive speech about how he has been responsible for lowering recidivism rates, which basically means the rate of reentry to jail, rearrest, and reentry, for those of you that are not criminal defense attorneys or study this thing. I had no idea how to do a project like this. I also didn't know at the time that I was dyslexic or ADHD. Like law school was a nightmare for me, all the reading and the writing. And so I would literally drive there. I would be terrified to walk into work knowing I had this big assignment. Everybody else had little things to do. So I would sit and I would procrastinate all day, do nothing, like literally not even crack open a book. I didn't even open up LexisNexis. I did nothing. And this went on for 3 months. I would drive there 5 days a week. I would do nothing all day. I'd go to lunch with the other interns. I'd then sit around. I'd do nothing all day. I didn't even have social media or the internet to like just blow off the time. I was literally doing nothing. And then he called me in. You're right. I'll never forget it. I don't remember a lot of that summer, but I do remember being called in. And I remember my cheeks being bright red and my armpits were sweating like crazy. And I was wearing a suit that my mother had probably bought me at JCPenney's. And he stood there and said, how is it coming? You know, this speech that I need to give is coming up. I'd love to see what you're working on. And I literally blustered. I was like, oh, well, yeah, there's tons of data to go through. And the research department's been really helpful. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to get it to you. I know I'm going back to school next week. I promise you it'll be done. I walked out his door. I didn't even stop by my office to turn the lights off. I went straight out to the parking lot. I jumped in my parents' car and I drove right back to Muskegon, Michigan. And I never went back. Nothing. Nothing.
It's unbelievable that you're such a capable human being when I hear that story.
It is unbelievable. If I can change from somebody that is literally riddled with anxiety and just completely on edge all the time, to a person who is, I think I'm tremendously self-aware, both the internal self-awareness and external self-awareness, and change my habits in the way that I think and really heal my nervous system, you can too.
Hey, it's Mel. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed that video, by God, please subscribe because I don't want you to miss a thing. Thank you so much for being here. We've got so much amazing stuff coming. Thank you so much for sending this stuff to your friends and your family. I love you. We create these videos for you. So make sure you subscribe. Mwah.